What happens when the most powerful director in China decides to stop playing by the rules? Feng Xiaogang wasn't just a filmmaker. He was a national voice, a mirror to society, and a master of walking the line between art and censorship. But one day, he vanished. No farewell, no scandal, just silence. Behind that silence is a chilling story of defiance, erasure, and the hidden cost of telling the truth in a system that punishes it. This is the rise and quiet fall of Feng Xiaogang. Subscribe to Criminal Tracks for more stories the headlines don't dare to tell. Feng Xiaogang's journey begins not in glittering film studios, but amid the gray, chaotic years of China's Cultural Revolution. Born in Beijing in 1958, Feng came of age during a time when books were burned, artists were persecuted, and creativity was seen as a threat to political order. His father, a professor, fell victim to the turmoil, and the young Feng learned early the cost of standing out. But those early years also planted something in him, an instinct to observe, to laugh at absurdity, and later to tell stories that mirrored the contradictions of the world he lived in. Before he ever picked up a camera, Feng worked as a stage designer for the Beijing Television Art Center. He wasn't a film school prodigy. He was, in every sense, self-made. He learned the craft from the inside out, starting with how to frame a scene, light a shot, and evoke emotion from the mundane. In those formative years, he forged relationships with writers like Wang Shuo, whose irreverent novels would help shape Feng's comedic tone and edgy narratives. In the 1990s, as China entered an era of breakneck modernization, Feng saw something few others did: a hunger among urban audiences for stories that weren't about glorified heroes or revolutionary martyrs, but about regular people caught in the chaos of real life. His breakout hit, The Dream Factory in 1997, wasn't just a surprise box office success. It was a seismic shift in Chinese cinema. Here was a film that dared to be funny, self-aware, and deeply satirical in a time when such storytelling was rare. Feng had tapped into the middle-class psyche, poking fun at their dreams, failures, and insecurities. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a mirror. What followed was a string of smart, sharp comedies: Be There or Be Square, Sorry Baby, Big Shot's Funeral. Each film, while wrapped in humor, tackled deeper themes: disillusionment, modernity, the clash between old values and new money. He became known for what critics called Feng-style comedy, a unique blend of sharp dialogue, grounded characters, and biting social observation. By the early 2000s, Feng was no longer just a comedian with a camera. He evolved into one of the few directors in China who could command both commercial and critical success. With Cell Phone, 2003, he struck a nerve. The story about a popular TV host whose secret affairs are exposed through his mobile phone was not only a smash hit, but also a pointed commentary on surveillance, media hypocrisy, and personal privacy. Many suspected it was a veiled jab at real-life personalities, especially the revered talk show host Kui Yongyuan. The controversy didn't stop Feng. If anything, it emboldened him. He began pivoting toward more serious, sweeping narratives. With The Banquet, 2006, he dabbled in Shakespearean drama. Then came Assembly, 2007, a gritty war film that stunned audiences with its raw depiction of sacrifice and bureaucratic indifference. It marked a new chapter in Feng's career, one where he wasn't just the people's entertainer, but their conscience. In 2010, he released Aftershock, a harrowing drama about the 1976 Tangshan earthquake. It became the highest-grossing domestic film at the time and cemented Feng's place as a director who could handle tragedy with the same dexterity he had once handled punchlines. He didn't just make audiences laugh anymore, he made them cry, think, and reflect. Behind the camera, Feng was gaining power. He helped launch the careers of top stars like Xu Fan, his wife, and worked closely with industry giants like Gay Yu and Zhang Guoli. He also became closely affiliated with Huayi Brothers, one of China's biggest film companies. Feng wasn't just directing films, he was shaping the industry. Yet for all his success, there was always a sense that Feng was dancing on a razor's edge. Unlike many of his contemporaries who towed the party line, Feng occasionally dared to criticize the system, albeit indirectly. His films were filled with subtle nods to political absurdity, historical trauma, and the moral compromises of modern life. This balancing act earned him both admiration and anxiety. On one hand, the public saw him as a bold voice in a heavily censored environment. On the other, officials viewed him with quiet suspicion. How long could someone like Feng operate before the system pushed back? As the 2010s began, Feng continued to build his legend. With Back to 1942, 2012, he tackled the Henan famine, a dark chapter in Chinese history that had rarely been addressed on screen. It was a cinematic risk. The film portrayed not only human suffering, but also bureaucratic indifference and political paralysis. While the government didn't openly condemn it, the film was noticeably absent from major state-endorsed awards. Feng didn't stop. He moved on to Personal Tailor, 2013, returning briefly to comedy, then dove into I Am Not Madame Bovary, 2016, starring Fan Bingbing as a rural woman who battles the legal system for justice. Shot in a circular frame and steeped in metaphor, the film was both visually daring and politically provocative. By this point, Feng had become a rare breed, a mainstream director who could make subversive art. He was both inside the system and against it, a contradiction that mirrored the very society he critiqued. But such a balancing act couldn't last forever. Whispers in the industry suggested that censorship officials were increasingly uncomfortable with his themes, especially as the political climate under Xi Jinping grew tighter. Feng's reputation as a national treasure didn't shield him from scrutiny. Still, for a time, he remained untouchable, too famous to silence outright, too popular to ignore. Yet beneath the accolades and red carpet appearances, tension was building. He had pushed the boundaries again and again, and the walls were starting to close in. The pressure began to mount quietly, like steam building beneath a sealed lid. Feng Xiaogang had long been adept at tiptoeing around China's political red lines, but by 2017, his calculated choreography started to falter. That year, he completed Youth, a coming-of-age drama centered on a troupe of young military performers during the Cultural Revolution and the Sino-Vietnamese War. The film, lush and nostalgic, was anything but politically neutral. It painted the revolutionary era with unflinching honesty, highlighting not just youthful romance and idealism, but also the psychological trauma, confusion, and eventual abandonment these characters faced as the country changed without them. The film's original release was scheduled for National Day, a symbolic and politically loaded window. But without warning or official explanation, Youth was pulled just days before its premiere. The silence from censors spoke volumes. No statement was ever issued, but industry insiders speculated that the portrayal of the Cultural Revolution and the veterans' disillusionment touched a nerve with propaganda authorities. The film was eventually released 2 months later, and though it still performed well at the box office, the delay sent a chilling signal. It was a warning. Feng had crossed a line, not through sensationalism, but through sincerity. Around this time, Feng's public tone began to shift. At award ceremonies and press events, he spoke less like an entertainer and more like a frustrated artist. He openly criticized the film rating system, or lack thereof, in China. He bemoaned how bureaucrats, not filmmakers, were deciding what Chinese audiences were allowed to see. On social media, he began posting cryptic comments, expressing dissatisfaction with censorship and the hollowing out of artistic expression. These posts often vanished shortly after appearing. Feng was no stranger to government scrutiny, but now it felt different. His words weren't just dissent, they were defiance, and they were happening during a time when China's government, under Xi Jinping's leadership, was tightening its grip on all aspects of society, including the arts. Cultural expression was being folded into a broader political agenda, one that demanded alignment, loyalty, and ideological correctness. That same year, an unexpected bombshell landed, one that would drag Feng's name into a scandal that had little to do with film and everything to do with money. Actress Fan Bingbing, the star of Feng's I Am Not Madame Bovary, was suddenly accused of tax evasion through yin-yang contracts, a dual contract system where only one version is reported to authorities. The case erupted into a national scandal. Fan disappeared from the public eye for months before re-emerging with a formal apology and a staggering tax bill of over $100 million. As the government widened its crackdown on financial misconduct in the entertainment industry, other prominent figures came under investigation. Feng Xiaogang was among them. His close relationship with Huayi Brothers, one of the most powerful studios in China, put him in the spotlight. Huayi was allegedly involved in similar contract practices, and although no formal charges were brought against Feng, the damage was already done. His name became a fixture in whispers, rumors, and online speculation. He wasn't accused of a crime, but he wasn't exactly cleared either. Almost overnight, Feng disappeared from the limelight. No more press tours, no red carpet strolls, no social commentary on Weibo. Projects he had previously announced went radio silent. A director known for releasing a film nearly every year suddenly had nothing in the pipeline. This silence prompted a flood of theories. Some believed he had been quietly banned by the government, one of the many soft bans China imposes without formal declaration. Others speculated he had left the country, possibly relocating to the United States, where his daughter had been studying. Photographs allegedly showing Feng in Los Angeles began circulating online. While these images were never verified, they only added to the sense of mystery surrounding his vanishing act. Unlike Fan Bingbing, Feng didn't issue any statement. He didn't apologize. He didn't deny. He didn't speak at all. This absence was deafening. It wasn't just the vanishing of a celebrity. It was the silencing of one of China's most culturally influential voices. For an industry so closely linked to politics, Feng's fall became a cautionary tale. Directors and actors began censoring themselves more than ever. The era of bold storytelling seemed to be drawing to a close. In 2019, as China pushed for more patriotic films and state-sanctioned narratives, Feng's style, personal, subversive, and emotionally honest, was increasingly out of step. Even when he was listed as a producer on a few smaller projects, his name was downplayed in promotions. He had gone from icon to ghost. Some viewed this as a deliberate self-exile, a survival strategy to avoid direct confrontation or harsher punishment. Others saw it as punishment itself. He wasn't imprisoned, but he wasn't allowed to speak freely either. It was a silent purgatory, one that left fans and fellow filmmakers uneasy. In 2021, occasional whispers about Feng's whereabouts surfaced again. Unconfirmed reports suggested he was quietly residing in the US, still writing, perhaps waiting for the political tide to turn. A few brief sightings at private film events reignited hope among loyal followers, but nothing substantial materialized. His social media accounts remained dormant. Industry publications stopped mentioning his name altogether. His once bright career had become a ghost story whispered among insiders. It wasn't a fall from grace in the traditional sense. There was no dramatic trial, no public shaming, but rather an erosion, a quiet disintegration of visibility and influence. By now, the message was clear. You didn't need to be arrested to be erased. In modern China, silence could be just as effective. The man who had once held a mirror up to Chinese society was now being airbrushed from its cultural narrative. The irony, of course, is that Feng had spent decades making films about people who were forgotten, sidelined, and ignored. Now he had become one of them. Not because he failed, but because he dared to succeed without conforming. The director who had shaped an entire generation's cinematic language had been pushed into the margins by the very system he once played so masterfully. Feng Xiaogang's disappearance from the public eye didn't come with a final curtain call or a dramatic headline. It came with an unnerving quiet, For a man who had dominated Chinese cinema for decades, who had been both a mirror and a provocateur, this sudden vanishing act felt unnatural. It wasn't just his films that went missing. It was his presence, his commentary, his sharp tongue that once dared to call out the absurdities of a rapidly shifting society. And in that silence, a darker truth began to take shape. Not about one man, but about the system that swallowed him. In China, censorship doesn't always arrive with handcuffs or police raids. Sometimes it arrives with a whispered warning, a pulled release date, an invitation that never comes again. Feng's erasure was systematic. He wasn't publicly condemned because that would draw more attention. He was simply removed. The irony is staggering. Feng Xiaogang had made his career by telling stories about people on the edge. The forgotten soldier, the grieving mother, the bureaucratic casualty. And now he was the story. His films, once played nationwide, became less accessible. Newer generations no longer debated his ideas. Cultural critics spoke of him in the past tense. Even film retrospectives rarely included his name, as if referencing him was too risky. This wasn't just an artist in exile. It was an artist being methodically scrubbed from memory. Yet his legacy lingered, refusing to vanish completely. Old fans continued to circulate bootlegs and archived interviews. Film students still studied his work, noting how he managed to embed critique inside comedy, truth inside tragedy. While the West often romanticizes defiance, filmmakers like Scorsese, Coppola, or even Oliver Stone challenging institutions, Feng's world offered no such safety net. In China's system, the margin for rebellion is paper-thin. The higher you rise, the harder the state watches. And Feng had risen as high as anyone could without pledging total allegiance. There's a school of thought that believes Feng was given a choice: stay quiet or face consequences. If true, his withdrawal was less disappearance and more survival. Better to be silent and safe than vocal and crushed. It's a choice many Chinese artists face, and few navigate with success. But there's another lens, a more personal one. Feng wasn't just a director, he was a husband, a father, a man who had built a life outside the confines of the state. Perhaps the constant tension wore him down. Perhaps the censorship wasn't just political, it was spiritual. After decades of biting his tongue, of editing his voice, he may have simply had enough. Silence, then, could also be his final act of rebellion. No more compromises, no more veiled metaphors, just absence. And in that absence, he made his boldest statement yet. Still, the silence raises unsettling questions. What happens to a society when its most honest voices are muted? What does it say about a culture when its sharpest observer becomes a ghost? Feng's fall reveals more about the system than the man himself. It shows how power doesn't need to imprison, it only needs to erase. It shows how art, when too sincere, becomes dangerous. And it shows how even legends can be undone without a single headline. There are echoes here of other vanished voices, writers, musicians, journalists, who once shaped China's cultural landscape only to be quietly sidelined. Yet unlike many of his peers, Feng left behind a body of work that continues to haunt. Cell Phone, Aftershock, I Am Not Madame Bovary. These films still resonate, still provoke, still challenge. They are time capsules of resistance, filled with subtle digs at bureaucracy, class disparity, and state hypocrisy. Watching them now, knowing what followed, lends them even greater weight. In hindsight, the warnings were always there. Feng wasn't just telling stories. He was leaving breadcrumbs, pointing toward a reckoning he must have sensed was coming. And now that it has, the silence surrounding him only amplifies their meaning. His legacy, then, is paradoxical. Officially sidelined, yet culturally immortal. Politically inconvenient, yet emotionally indispensable. And in many ways, more powerful in absence than he ever was in presence. The very system that sought to silence him has, inadvertently, turned him into a symbol. Not a martyr in the Western sense, but a ghost that continues to whisper. For many, Feng Xiaogang represents a path not taken. A vision of Chinese cinema that dared to be unflinching. A director who believed that audiences deserved more than propaganda or spectacle. They deserved truth. And that belief, however quiet now, still lingers. It lingers in the questions his films raise, in the characters who refuse to fit the mold, in the stories that dared to show a country's wounds. Feng's disappearance may have closed a chapter, but it opened another, one where silence itself becomes a form of protest. In today's China, that may be the most dangerous art of all. While he remains out of the spotlight, his impact lives on, in whispers and shadows, in censored scripts and shelved projects. And somewhere, perhaps in Beijing, perhaps in Los Angeles, perhaps nowhere at all, Feng Xiaogang is still watching, still thinking, still refusing to play the game he once mastered, and maybe, just maybe, still planning his return. Not with a roar, but with a story only he knows how to tell. Feng Xiaogang may no longer grace red carpets or dominate box offices, but his absence says more than any film ever could. His story isn't just about a director, it's about power, silence, and the lines you cannot cross. Even when you're beloved. In a world where truth is dangerous, sometimes the loudest voice is the one that disappears. What will history remember, his brilliance or his vanishing? If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Criminal Tracks, where we uncover the stories they tried to bury.